These are just in the order that I read them in. So the first book that I gave 5 stars in 2024 was The Gift by Alison Groggon, which of course, if you know me, is a reread. This is the first released book in the Books of Pelennor that my channel is named after. So of course, I adore this book so much. We follow a young enslaved girl named Myrad, who is saved from enslavement by a powerful sorcerer named Curdvan, and it turns out that she's actually very important to this world and she is helping to eradicate evil. There's a lot of influences from Tolkien in here. I adore this series to within an inch of my life. Can you tell? Read it. Then I listened to the audiobook of A Tempest of Tea by Hafsah Faizal, and the wonderful Caitlin from Letters from Cymradi gifted me this beautiful signed edition from Waterstones. Just, I loved this. This is the first book in a new series of like vampires, and they drink special tea rather than blood sucking off of people, and I just was so absolutely obsessed and absorbed into this world. It was my first ever Hafsah Faizal. If you'd like to see my January TBR, I'm hoping to read my second in 2025. But yes, her prestigious tea room transforms into an illegal bloodhouse by night, catering to the vampires feared by society. There's a high-stakes heist to the sinister vampire underworld. I had a lot of fun with this one. Then I finished up the Scythe series, Arc of the Scythe by Neal Shusterman with The Toll. I absolutely adored this. I didn't read this edition, I have a paperback and I read that. I really don't need 2 sets, but here we are. I really love this whole series. If you don't know, Scythe is the first book, and this is a world where humanity has defeated all illnesses and old age, and so no one dies, and so scythes are set to glean people to keep the population at a certain level. Of course, there are socio-political ramifications for this, because not everyone is able to do this without being biased. And the series kind of goes from there, and I just, such a good series. Then, I get annoyed. Godsgrave by Jay Kristoff is a piece of shit, but Carrie from Caring for Books had gifted this to me well before he came out with his shittiness, at least that I knew of. And annoyingly, I love this series. The first book follows Mia Cover, a young woman who is determined to get revenge for the murder of her mother and father after their attempted coup was overthrown. It's very dark, it's very gritty, it's very funny. There's footnotes from the author which I really enjoy, and it's just annoyingly fantastically written. How dare he? Then one that came to me via Hannah from Lara M and Waypoint Books, and that is Rizzio by Denise Mina. Now this is short and sweet, but so good. In this book we're following Mary Queen of Scots and her secretary and friend Rizzio, who is not going to come to a fortunate end by the end of this, and this is just so gripping, and I don't know how to... Basically, I read this almost a year ago now, but my main vibe from it is just, fuck, that was good. Parliament is wanting to take Scotland in one direction, and then the Scottish want to go in another direction, but then there's also people betraying the main people of Scotland, and this all fits just in here, and they commit violent murder, just as a content warning, and this is brilliantly written, amazing. Cannot recommend this enough, and this is part of like a little series from a few different authors that write some similar kind of like historical situations. Require them. Require. Next up is a Derek Landy skullduggery pleasant book, A Mind Full of Murder. This series starts off following a skeleton detective and a young teenage girl in Ireland who discovers that she has magic and wants to enter into this world. There's like 18 books in the series now, so it's moved on a lot from there, but I adore this series so much, and unsurprisingly adored this book, which is the first in a new trilogy in the skullduggery universe. Then my highest rated book of the year that wasn't a reread, and that is Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. Oh my gosh. This is a young black woman who escapes a cult that their ideal is supposedly that they are escaping the persecution of white people, and so they have living together in peace away from them. But it is a cult, and so the leader does all the cult things that you would expect, and our main character is actually pregnant from him and his sexual assault. She goes on to give birth to twins, and then tries to escape the cult, and it is the process of living in the wild, coming to terms with herself, learning about herself and about society, and it's beautifully done. As always, I've adored everything I've ever read from Rivers Solomon. They are an amazing writer. The Transgender Issue by Shon Faye is amazing. This non-fiction is fantastically written. So Shon herself is a white woman, but she definitely talks about the intersectionality of race and also of disability and socioeconomic status that also then comes with being transgender and how that impacts, and she talks to various different people on that topic. It's fantastically written. It is a perfect base for anyone to come in to get this knowledge. I cannot scream about this enough. It's amazing, like everyone's yelling about it for a reason. All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Remarque. I was expecting to go in and just think it's fine. I was reading it because it's a classic and I was curious. And it ended up being a 5-star read. This is an account of a World War I German soldier's time in the trenches, which is so accurate, so harrowing and so moving. It was actually banned by Hitler during World War II because it would de-influence young men from joining up and going to the front. It is difficult to read, it is touching, it really demonstrates what it was like on the German front line and the humanity that was still somehow present there despite what they were going through. I also think this is notable because the vast majority of World War II literature that we read either comes from concentration and extermination camps or from the Allies, and whilst the concentration and extermination camps are very, very important points of views, the Allies, one, they get to write the narrative, and even for World War I, which was fought for different reasons than World War II, for World War I it's really important to see from the German side because these soldiers were just boys, the same as our boys. They didn't necessarily side with their government, they were just doing what they were told to do. Again, same as our boys. And yeah, it's really harrowing. Staying on the less than joyful theme is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is the young woman who was sexually assaulted by Brock Turner at the Stanford campus in the United States. And this talks about the impact that that had on her life, but it really goes more in depth than you might expect. It took years of her life away from her, because whilst he was continuing to go to uni and just living his life, she was dealing with the trauma from the situation, she was dealing with trying to maintain evidence for long enough, as well as trying to rebuild a life that had been torn down around her, whilst also trying to still remain herself, but also it's good. It's really good. It talks about the economic and the mental impacts of being sexually assaulted, especially in the United States. Medical bills, having to fly to different places in the country for different reasons. It is really, really important to read, in my opinion, especially with current events. And I read this via audiobook and I think it was incredibly well done. My first Discworld 5 stars was Small Gods by Terry Pratchett. This is one of the standalone books and its primary discussion is on religion, if you couldn't guess from Small Gods. This is done absolutely fantastically. It talks about fanatical religion, about believing in something bigger than yourself, but also the influence and the manipulation that is held by people in positions of power that use it for their own gain rather than for the religion that they purport to support. Pratchett doesn't rag too much on any one religion. If there's one more that he rags on, I would say it's Christianity, which, given that he is British and we are a Christian nation, I feel like that's fair enough. And I think it's done very well in keeping the comedy and keeping you entertained whilst also making you think deeply about these religious issues, about issues with people in power and how they wield their power. It is my first Discworld 5 star and I'm sure there are many more to come. The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin is... why am I like, oh, it's fantastic? It's a 5-star video, of course it's fantastic. This one I listened to primarily via audiobook. This is in a world where big cities have personification, literally some person wakes up and is embodied by the city, and New York is so big and so inhabited that they actually have a person for each borough. But something's wrong and New York isn't waking up the way it's supposed to, and so this is them dealing with that and trying to defeat the evil whilst waking New York up. There's discussions here on racism, sexism, homophobia, misogyny, everything, xenophobia, just everything. It's done really, really well. It's my first ever N.K. Jemisin and I'm very excited to read more from this author. Then this is both a reread and not a reread. It's rewritten, so it's new content, but I have read this book before, The Mime Order by Samantha Shannon, the second book in the Bone Season series. I adore this series so much. It is a dystopian sci-fi fantasy, yes it is all of them, and this is the Broken Binding edition. I'm still waiting on my version of The Sun Rising to appear. Hopefully it will appear sooner rather than later. Typical that I'm missing that one. But I absolutely adore this series so much. It has a lot of discussions on the use of power, on trusting people, on magic, on love. It's done perfectly. The series is just, oh, to die for. Then we've got two non-fictions. The first one is Missing Thread by Daisy Dunn. This is a history of the ancient world, but through women's eyes. This is actually a really good place to start if you don't know too much about the ancient world, which is ancient Greece and ancient Rome anyway, because it still tells you everything about them. The main difference here is that Daisy Dunn hasn't removed the presence of women that have been discovered to be present there archaeologically and through texts. She instead includes them and gives them some more page time than you would get usually, because they have been removed entirely from so many other texts. So as someone who doesn't know that much about ancient Greece and knows a lot more about ancient Rome, this was actually really useful for me to just learn in general about ancient Greece, let alone specifically about the women. It's really well written, really readable, and I think it's very important that these women aren't lost to history because they have had such an impact. Sometimes it was through being the mother or the wife of some high up bloke in politics and they managed to have a massive influence on him. Other times it was through their own direct actions. But regardless, their history deserves to be remembered too, and I think it's really important that this is being documented so that they aren't lost to time. And then a very different kind of non-fiction, this is Owls of the Eastern Ice by Jonathan C. Slaght, and this is it's an adventure story and a memoir and a science paper. So it's all about these owls, and they are very rare, they have been nearing extinction multiple times, and they live primarily in Russia. And even if you go to middle of buttfuck Russia, it's still hard to see them and find them, and so this person is doing his PhD and his dissertation on these owls, and so is going out to Russia and do this research. The environment itself is very difficult to work in. You have to, leave by a certain time so that you're still travelling over ice before the river melts, and you're going to these very rural locations, and this is Russia in the 90s, and so the communication that is present nowadays isn't there, and so they don't know who this random American guy is, and it's written so entertainingly and is so gripping. I loved learning more about Russia and rural Russia at this time period, about the owls themselves and their own habits and how they live, and also just about this guy kind of gallivanting around Eastern brain, I have a geography degree, and just learning more about this guy gallivanting around Eastern Russia, learning Russian in the 90s as an American, and his life doing that. It's fantastic. Then I dove into a sequel, and that is European Travel for the Monstrous Gentlewoman by Theodora. This is the second book in the series. The first one is following, in Victorian London, some young women who are related to some of the biggest sci-fi Victorian names, so Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Dr. Moreau, who else is there, Frankenstein, Rappaccini, so many different names, and they end up banding together, these young women, to solve a mystery, and it's fantastical, it's science fiction, it is historical, mixed in with all of these classic novels that have been reinterpreted to include these young women as part of their lore. It is such a fantastic series and so much fun and so well written. Then I actually listened to the podcast release of The Haunted House on Hollow Hill by Derek Landy, which is slightly different from the physical publication, but I'm holding this one up because why not? The physical publication has some additional characters included, so there's the difference for you, but this is fantastic. The audio, the podcast is free, and you can dive into this without having read any of the previous Skullduggery books, which is handy when it's such a long series, and it's produced so well, so many different voice actors, there's fantastic audio effects. I can't recommend it highly enough. I was so annoyed I had to wait each week to get the next edition, the next weekly segment out. It was done absolutely fantastically. It's a really fun story, a really great way to dive into Skullduggery if you haven't read it before and you'd like to try it out. Just, such a good time. I can actually give the plot for this. I forgot. I was like, oh, it's book X in a series. But no, they go to a hotel that's known for being haunted in the middle of the UK, in England, and there's a murder that occurs. And so they are there trying to solve the murder, but there is also a supernatural element to it. There is some sort of haunting going on in this hotel, and so they're trying to determine both why this person has been murdered, why the rest of them are in danger, and where the haunting comes from. So good, so good. Then I did a reread of Murderbot, All Systems Red by Martha Wells. I adore this sci-fi robot to the edge of eternity and back. This is about a security unit that has hacked its governor system so it can do what it wants, but it ends up just saving the humans that it's tasked to look after anyway because they are so dumb and bumbling and it doesn't want to see them die. And that then evolves into them trying to figure out what awful situation has happened on this planet that they're visiting with their assigned humans. It is so much fun, such a short read. I am really looking forward to buying and reading some more from Murderbot this year. I'm really hoping I can do that now that I'm no longer on a book buying ban. It's one of the ones that I've really wanted to dive back into. Then I did a reread of The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I fell way more in love than I did the first time I read this. I read this 2 years ago the first time by audiobook. This time instead I did a combination of audio and physically so I could tab it up, and it was just so much of a better experience. I had such a fantastic time delving into this book. Everyone knows the plot of The Lord of the Rings. I knew the plot of The Lord of the Rings before I'd read it, and I've only read it relatively recently, so I won't go into that, but it is beautifully written, and whilst it is intimidating and it's not the quickest read, I do think personally that it's worth it. It's worth putting that effort in because it is a classic and beloved for a reason, and yeah, this was just, wow, one of my best books of the year. I finally got to read Hogfather. This was the entire reason I was reading one Discworld book each and every month this year, was so that I could read Hogfather by Terry Pratchett in December. I had a great time with this. This is Death being the Discworld's version of Santa, and they're trying to solve a mystery because where has Santa gone? He's not Santa, he's the Hogfather, but where has he gone? Why can't he do his duty? We also have Susan, Death's granddaughter, in here, and it is just a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to rereading it each and every Christmas. It was a great time. Darkdawn by Jay Kristoff. Annoyed for the same reasons as mentioned before, but I've given all 3 of these books 5 stars. This series is too good. Then one that I'm holding up again, Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. This was my first time reading this one. Loved it. So good. Oh my gosh. Just in case anyone's curious, Two Towers got 4.5 stars. So don't worry, it still did very well, but Return of the King and Fellowship are my 2 5 stars out of this trilogy. I absolutely adored Lord of the Rings so much. I am so glad that I've finally been able to read this classic series, and just, I adored it. I adored it so much. If I'd known how much I was going to adore it, I would have been a lot less intimidated by it. Then one of my rereads was A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I reread this each and every Christmas, usually on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and have a wonderful time with it. I get something new out of it each and every year. I see something new each year, and I just love sitting and reading this little book every Christmas. Then I read The Island by Alison, which is one of the short stories that was released only on ebook. So it feels slightly cheating always whenever I put something like this as a 5 star, but is anyone really surprised? This is a fantastic look at Myrad, our main character, in the future, well after the main series is set, and where she's at, and a little bit of an adventure, a mini adventure for her to go on. I really loved this. I really loved seeing where she is in this future and getting to just have a little bit more time with her. I loved it. And then my final book of the year was a 5 star read. And this is The League of Lady Poisoners by Lisa Perrin. Now this book is beautiful. I mean, like, the cover is beautiful, but there's also a lot of beauty inside. Let me find... I showed... like, there we go. I'll show something different. There you go. Because I showed the plants last time because I was obsessed. But there's beautiful illustrations throughout this whole thing. And I did mention it in my December wrap-up, if anyone would like to see more in depth on this one there. But this is just beautifully done. It looks at female poisoners from across time, starting, you know, in ancient times, going up to the modern day. It talks about some of them who are perhaps more understandable for their decisions, for example being abused, and those who just killed for the fun of it. And it looks into all of them, their reasons, their motives, why they were or were not infamous. it's just really well written. I was reading this on New Year's Eve. Our New Year's Eve was we were sitting inside, we were eating cheese and crackers, drinking alcohol, and my partner was playing a video game while I read a book. We were having a wonderful time, and this was just so enjoyable to sit and read through. It's absolutely fantastic. I highly recommend it. And that's it. Those are all of my 2024 5-star reads. I cannot recommend enough each and every one of these books to you all. They are fantastic, all of them. Like, oh, if you've read any of them down below and you also enjoyed them, please fangirl about them with me. Need more of that in my life. And if you are intrigued or have been persuaded to pick any of these or their related series up, please do let me know down below, because I would love to know that I'm getting someone to pick up one of my 5-star reads. Thank you so much for watching, folks. If you'd like to see what ends up being my 5-star reads in 2025, you better hit subscribe and follow along, and hopefully I will see you in the next video. Bye!